In '58, I was assigned the responsibility of being a representative to the technical representative to the State Department from the labs, that is Livermore and Los Alamos, on the question of nuclear bomb testing in space, the treaty to try to come to an agreement that both the United States and the Soviet Union would not test in space. So there was a question of how we would give assurance to each other that we were not, quote, cheating. And the agenda that was happening was, of course, the United States wanted to have satellites up there to ensure that no one was cheating. And of course, if they did a little spying on the Soviet Union as well, that would be a plus. Whereas the Soviet Union, of course, didn't want those dang satellites up there spying on them. And so the agenda of the American delegation, particularly Charlie Stell, who was just the most extraordinary person in charge. There was an ambassador, but the State Department person was Charlie Stell, suggested that, Stirling, couldn't we bring up the question of whether there wasn't something else that might trigger the system and help us gain the trust of satellites and seeing what each of us was doing. And so I agreed that this was a very good move and that we should discuss how we might have false triggering of a satellite system in space. And I discussed, I had no one to discuss it with in Geneva. There's just very good food and very good entertainment. And so I gave a chalk talk for about an hour and 15 minutes on the triggering of a detection system of satellites by possible astrophysical phenomena in space that we did not yet understand. And I gave one of the examples, but that was the last one, was the supernova business, which I had worked a little on before with Montgomery Johnson in Livermore. And I described how the inherent time properties of the explosion phenomena were very similar to a nuclear bomb, and or at least the effects that we would see from a nuclear bomb, the time constants and so on. And so the Soviet delegation, just at the end of my talk, there was kind of a stunned silence. Of course, I'd been talking for quite a while. And they caucused, you might say, or got together. And after about 10 minutes, Ambassador Serapkin, who we used to jocosely call Scratchy Serapkin, an extraordinarily able man, Soviet ambassador, came out with a statement, "Who knows what a supernova is?" It was general put down of me personally, but the Soviet delegation was made up of a number of scientists who were very much more senior to me and much more knowledgeable. So I immediately had a rather strong reaction inside me, which I didn't show. But it was that, son of a bitch, I'm going to show you what a supernova is and how it works. Of course, that made my career. It really helped. I mean, I became an astrophysicist over it because so many then, when I went back to Livermore and I told Teller about it, and I said, we can't have this kind of stupidity up there on an international scene. And how about we go calculate with the bomb codes how a supernova works? And so with Dick White and I, we calculated. And of course, none of them would work. I mean, everything we calculated, they all fizzled. Of course, they still do in calculations, whatever it is, 50 years later. So that's where the neutrino part of the thing was dreamt up. But it was from that background that when I heard about the meeting on neutron stars here with Tommy Gold and so on, I kind of felt I should have been part of it because we had done the calculation showing how these objects form. And at least the collapse to a neutron star perhaps afterwards we really haven't understood why they don't continue to collapse to a black hole. Initiation of astrophysics at Los Alamos happened because of the negotiations with the Soviet Union on the test ban. And my personal embarrassment of not knowing really what a supernova was made me demand of the management of Livermore, namely Edward Teller, that we establish astrophysics as one of the necessary components of science at the national laboratories. And those have been major endeavors, both at Los Alamos later and Livermore earlier. And of course, you know, the tree was ripe and it needed just a little shaking to bring out the supernova and neutrino stuff. But the very positive reaction of the Soviet Union was to politically, the politicians like Ambassador Sirotkin, to give the scientists, the Russian scientists, a great deal more say-so in the negotiations. And I like to think, and I have even reason to believe, that that was the beginning of the slow movement towards perestroika, which of course has meant this extraordinary cooperation and unraveling of what would have been a catastrophe of a nuclear holocaust. So when by then I had sort of figured out how supernova worked, of course that's periodically being reinvented like the wheel, then I was up here in Aspen, a little bit of vacation, because we had just bought a little house, because having arrived in New Mexico Tech without any home, my little dacha here at Aspen was my home. And Rosie and I were up here for a bit of a vacation with the kids. And so I run into David Pines and Chris Pethick and Gordon at the Wienerstube. And so we just all had lunch together, and they were telling me all about their neutron star conference and why wasn't I there, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, the reason was sort of obvious. But I said I really thought they should get astrophysics as a major, not a major, but a significant addition to the Aspen Center, because the general perception was that physics was being treated fairly preciously. And I was close enough to many people at NSF and NASA, because of being thrown into committees of one sort and another, to realize that this thing really needed to be a part of a bigger community. And David instantly agreed and went off that afternoon to the Regents meeting on the Aspen Center, and it was de facto. But after that, the difficulties were immense, because at that stage of our science, astrophysics was almost, you know, engulfed by the observers of astronomy. And there's a tremendous difference between astronomy and astrophysics, one being an observational science and observers and who are closer to experimentalists, and the rest of us trying to understand it, called astrophysics. And so that was why we had to make so many compromises of workshops to satisfy this part of astronomy perception, which drove NASA, which was primarily observing. And so the effect of these workshops that went on over 10 years was to increase the visibility of astrophysics by an immense amount. And I feel that that was the real success of the Aspen Institute about astrophysics. So it finally got weaned to the point where the president, director, or everyone here can say can float on its own. What with 5 workshops supported through NSF this year, and astrophysics, I just go, inside me, a real victory. The thing I was working for so hard. From the day, that the Soviets said, who knows what a supernova is? And then to have the national labs jump aboard in astrophysics. And then through the graces of this institute, the astrophysics, the visibility of it, coming up to being where the dominance that it currently is. So I was immensely pleased seeing that happen, and immensely pleased that I could be part of it. I wrote the proposal that NASA funded for, as I understand, for roughly 10 years. I don't know exactly, 10, 12 years, something like that. And off and on I help, and then I just got asked to write the current one with Dave DeYoung, and I have no idea whether he's already written it or not. Such is our communication these days. One gets lost in these things. But yes, writing that proposal and interacting with what NASA wanted was I had these 2 very high power people, namely Al Cameron and George Field, really dictating what should be done, but it just worked.
Do you have a memory of what year the first astrophysics workshop was? Do you have a way of dating it?
No, other than relative to that meeting with David Pines and Gordon and Chris. I think that was in '69, so 70 would have been the first workshop. It was very rapid because, well, as I say, those 2 heavies agreed with me so much, namely George Field and Al Cameron. And so it was instantaneous. Al was the one who, first time I talked about the neutrino-driven supernova process, was the one who kind of organized that there would be a meeting about this at the APS meeting. So what was to have been just a small paper in a session, he got a special room for it, and it was totally mobbed. But that's what Cameron did for me, time and again. He knew how to pick on things which would be listened to and were important.
He was at Iowa State, which is where I got my degree. And so he's
no idea.
Yes, it's very interesting. So is Don Langenberg, which is sort of an interesting trajectory. But he was in nuclear physics, came from Chalk River.
Yes, he came from Chalk River.
Did a postdoc in nuclear at the synchrotron. And I mean, he was doing, theory, but he was doing, it was nuclear physics, and then he moved into it. So I knew him sort of.
Well, I always thought of Al being, 10 years older than I. And I must say, all of my cohorts and friends thought so too, but we were the same age. And, but when we worked together, it was always 50-50. But
is there anything else you want to say about the Physics Center? Is that the main thing?
That's, it's always where I vet myself on every new idea, because in this environment, you can bring up something and someone will jump on you instantly if it's stupid, and maybe they'll jump on you anyhow because you're on their territory. But that's what happens here. And I just feel it's the most precious, worthwhile thing in physics, simply because it's kind of an ultimate truth serum on all our work. And I think this is, I don't know, I just love it. As I pulled out of my pocket during the session, the paper of Adam Burrows was an argument right at that critical point of, can we yet figure out how supernovae work? And it's only at Aspen Center for Physics that I would expect to go for one of our puff meetings about the past. I apologize. And instantly get plugged into the problem that I'm working on, which is the marvelous property of this place. You can do both all the time. And I thank you for the privilege of participating in that all the ways.